You can't use this road ever again." That's what Linda Harrow, president of the Cedar Ridge HOA, shrieked at me one humid morning, her heels dug into the gravel like she owned the whole county. Behind her, two board members bobbed their heads like broken toys, while a construction crew welded a steel gate across the only road leading to my farm. I stood there, boots still caked with mud from fixing my fence, staring at the barricade that now cut me off from my own home. For a moment, I thought it had to be a prank. But when Linda flashed that smug grin and slapped a notice into my hand demanding I join her HOA or lose all access, the truth hit me like a hammer. This wasn't a prank. This was extortion, dressed up as community standards. What Linda didn't know was that I had spent years as a military engineer trained to go through walls, over obstacles, and yes, even under them. If she wanted a war, she'd just lit the fuse. Before I tell you how this fight spiraled into helicopters, lawsuits, and a tunnel she never saw coming, drop a comment with your location and local time. Let's see how far this HOA madness reaches. First time I saw the Cedar Ridge HOA marching toward my driveway, I knew peace was about to become a luxury I couldn't afford. Linda Harrow strutted in front, arms folded like she owned the whole valley. Behind her, two board members trailed close, nodding at every word before she even spoke. They weren't neighbors stopping by for a chat. They looked more like debt collectors, ready to cash in on a bill I never owed. My name's Miles Carter. After 2 decades as a military engineer, I walked away from bureaucracy and battlefields. What I wanted was simple, quiet land where the only rules were the ones I set. That's what I thought I found in Redstone County. My property deed was ironclad, my boundaries surveyed, my fence lines sharp. I bought 60 acres of open pasture and dense timber with one promise to myself no one would dictate how I lived again. But I made one miscalculation. The only road to my land passed through Cedar Ridge, a subdivision trapped under Linda's HOA grip. For decades, locals had used that stretch without issue. Farmers, delivery drivers, even the county fire department rolled through without so much as a raised eyebrow. But the moment Linda took the gavel as HOA president, she saw dollar signs. To her, the road wasn't a lifeline. It was leverage. She wasted no time delivering her verdict. If I wanted access to my own home, I'd have to join Cedar Ridge HOA and pay their monthly dues. To some, it might have sounded like a polite request for community contribution. To me, it was extortion with a smile. I reminded her my land was never part of their subdivision, that my deed was independent. She didn't care. Linda was the kind of person who could turn technicalities into weapons. What stung wasn't just her arrogance, but the smug confidence that I would fold. She thought I was just another landowner who'd grumble, then sign the papers out of convenience, but I'd been through worse than HOA politics. I'd built bridges under mortar fire, rerouted convoys through hostile ground, and solved problems with lives hanging in the balance. And if Linda thought she could box me in with a steel gate and a rule book, she had no idea who she was messing with. Compared to what I'd already faced in life, Linda and her clipboards were nothing but a nuisance. Yet she was a nuisance with power in her hands. The tension was thick in the air as she handed me a notice, printed on heavy paper, the HOA seal stamped in gold at the top like some royal decree. It demanded compliance within 1 week. The fine print was clear. Failure to join will result in restricted access to Cedar Ridge private roadways. My hands clenched as I read the words. Restricted access meant no access. And no access meant being locked inside my own land. That night, I sat on my porch staring at the gravel road that connected me to the rest of the county. Under the glow of the porch light, it looked harmless, fragile even. But I knew better. That stretch of gravel was about to become a battlefield. A man shouldn't have to fight just to drive home. Yet, if that's what it took, I was ready. The next morning, the war began. I woke to the grinding roar of machinery. At first, I thought it was a neighbor clearing brush, maybe hauling timber. But the sound was too metallic, too deliberate. I pulled on my boots and headed to the property line. What I saw twisted my stomach. Right where Cedar Ridge began, a construction crew was planting a massive steel gate. Posts buried deep in the earth, beams welded tight, and a motorized arm stretching across the road like the jaws of a trap. Cement trucks idled, their exhaust spilling into the crisp country air. And there she was again, Linda standing at the center of it all like a monarch surveying her empire. She didn't wave. She didn't flinch. She only smiled as sparks flew from the welders' torches, sealing my fate one joint at a time. I stormed toward her, demanding an explanation. She answered sweetly, like she was doing me a favor. Since you've chosen not to join the HOA, the board has voted to restrict your use of Cedar Ridge infrastructure. Infrastructure? That was her word for the only road to my home. It wasn't just petty, it was calculated. She wanted me isolated, desperate, cornered. She thought she could choke me into submission. But all she did was light a fuse I had no intention of putting out. That night, as the welders packed up and the new gate stood gleaming under the moonlight, I made myself a promise. Linda Harrow wanted a fight, then a fight she would get. And she had no idea just how far I was willing to go. By the weekend, the gate was finished. Solid steel, tall enough to stop a tractor, reinforced with concrete footings that sank 3 feet into the ground. But that still wasn't enough for Linda. Monday morning, I stood at the edge of Cedar Ridge's boundary and watched a backhoe tearing into the gravel road itself, piling dirt into mounds on either side. They were carving a trench, a crude ditch right in front of the gate. So even if I cut the lock or tried to force my way through, I'd be left axle deep in mud and rubble. This wasn't just a blockade anymore. It was sabotage. I confronted the crew, demanding to know under what authority they were tearing up the road. They just shrugged, pointing toward Linda. She was perched in a folding chair, a wide sun hat shading her face, sipping iced tea like she was enjoying a 4th of July parade. When she saw me, she lifted her glass in a mock salute. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't just about rules. This was war, community improvements, she called it, making sure non-members didn't trespass. Trespass. That word hit me harder than the roar of the backhoe. According to Linda, I wasn't a landowner trying to reach my property. I was an intruder. I called the sheriff's office. Hours later, a deputy finally showed up, an older man with weary eyes who looked like he'd seen this kind of nonsense before. He stared at the gate and trench, then sighed. I shoved my deed into his hands, explained decades of uninterrupted use, begged him to cite them for obstruction. He scratched the back of his neck. Technically, he said, the HOA owns this stretch. It's private property. They can control access. I nearly exploded. So they can cut me off from my own land? The deputy hesitated. It's complicated. You might have a case under easement law. If you can prove long-term open use of the road, or that your land is landlocked, the courts might grant you a right of way. But those cases take time, months, sometimes years. Until then, he shook his head. It's a gray area. That was the law's way of telling me I was on my own. I drove home in silence, fury boiling just beneath the surface. For the next few days, I improvised. I borrowed a dirt bike, blazing a rough trail through the forest that skirted Cedar Ridge entirely. Roots, rocks, streams. It was brutal, but it got me out. For supplies, I called in favors. A buddy from my service days flew a small chopper in, lowering pallets of feed and fuel directly into my pasture. Linda nearly choked on her lemonade when she saw that bird hovering over her subdivision. She filed complaints about unauthorized aerial disturbances. Sheriff tossed them straight into the trash, but Linda wasn't done. She doubled down. Soon I started receiving noise violation notices from the HOA ridiculous on their face, since I wasn't even a member. One accused me of running industrial machinery at midnight. Another claimed I damaged HOA property by driving near the gate. Pure fiction. Then came the certified letters. A stack of them, each threatening civil action. Every envelope carried Linda's signature sharp, precise, like a dagger. She wanted to bury me in paperwork as much as she wanted to bury me behind that steel gate. One evening, I rumbled back from town on my dirt bike, headlights bouncing across the rough forest trail I'd hacked out with sweat and stubbornness. As I neared my land, I saw floodlights blazing at the gate. Linda stood there with a small army of HOA loyalists, supervising as the backhoe deepened the trench. They weren't reinforcing it for safety. They were turning it into a moat a dozen feet across, 4 feet deep. I pulled off my helmet, stared at the spectacle, and laughed. It was madness. Linda spotted me, and her smile was pure poison. "Find another way home, Miles," she shouted. "This road belongs to Cedar Ridge." I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because in that moment, an idea sparked in my mind, one so bold it made me grin despite the rage burning inside me. If Linda wanted to dig down, fine. I'd go deeper. Back in my workshop, I unrolled blueprints I hadn't touched since the army. Field sketches of culverts, reinforced tunnels, emergency bypass systems. I knew soil stability, load tolerances, shoring methods. Building a tunnel wasn't just possible. It was my specialty. Still, I wasn't reckless. First, I dialed 811, the call before you dig service, to make sure no utilities ran under that road. The map came back clean. Next, I drove stakes into the ground, charting the slope of the terrain. With the right angle, I could bore straight under Cedar Ridge's gate and trench, connecting my side of the property to the county road beyond. It didn't need to be pretty. It just needed to work. I called 2 old service buddies, guys who could handle shovels and power tools as well as rifles. When I explained the situation, they didn't hesitate. "You're telling me some HOA witch is trying to blockade you?" One of them laughed. "Hell yes, I'm in." So under the cover of darkness, the digging began. Pickaxes, drills, buckets of dirt hauled out one load at a time. We laid plywood along the walls, reinforced with scrap steel, kept the tunnel just wide enough for a truck, low enough to avoid collapse, ventilated with a rigged fan system. It was brutal, backbreaking work, but every scoop of soil was a small victory against Linda's tyranny. Meanwhile, by day, she strutted around the gate like a queen surveying her conquered land, bragging to her board about how she'd forced me into checkmate. She had no clue I was literally tunneling under her nose. With each passing night, the tunnel inched closer to completion. By the end of the second week, it was nearly functional. Not glamorous, not meant to be, but sturdy. Reinforced beams lined the walls. A gravel bed kept the floor dry, and the airflow system hummed steadily thanks to a salvage generator. I'd built enough culverts and combat shelters to know what would hold and what would collapse. This one was safe, maybe safer than the so-called road above, which now looked more like a fortress and moat disguised as community improvements. But Linda wasn't backing down. If anything, her aggression escalated. She began patrolling the gate like a sentry, clipboard in hand, barking threats at anyone who so much as slowed near the barricade. Delivery drivers were turned away. Even the county trash truck was denied one morning, sparking a shouting match between the HOA and a furious sanitation worker. Linda didn't care. Control was her oxygen, and she was addicted to the high. I filed formal complaints with the sheriff's office, citing interference with emergency access. I even met with the county fire marshal, who frowned at the sight of that trench. "This isn't just harassment," he said. "If one of your buildings caught fire, or if you had a medical emergency, no fire engine or ambulance could reach you. That's a violation of safety standards." He pointed to the National Fire Protection Association's guidelines. Clear access roads were non-negotiable in rural areas. The HOA might have owned the asphalt, but they didn't own common sense. Armed with that statement, I returned to Linda. She was at her usual post-press blouse, manicured nails, sunglasses perched like she was commanding a battlefield. I laid the marshal's words down flat. "You're not just cutting me off," I said. "You're endangering everyone, fire, ambulance, sheriff. None of them can get through this mess." Her smile didn't even flicker. "That sounds like your problem, not ours." That answer told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't about safety or fairness or bylaws. It was about power. Linda wanted to prove she could bend me until I broke. But what she didn't know, I'd been tested by worse. A dictator with a clipboard was nothing compared to real battlefields. Still, the pressure was mounting. She began mailing certified letters directly to my home, accusing me of trespass, aerial disturbances from the helicopter drop, even soil destabilization because of my dirt bike. Each envelope ended with the same threat: failure to comply will result in immediate legal action. I knew she was bluffing, at least partly, but the weight of those letters piled up like bureaucratic sandbags, trying to crush me without a single bullet fired. One night, as I was reinforcing a section of the tunnel wall with steel braces, headlights appeared at the edge of my pasture. My dog barked furiously. Heart pounding, I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. A pickup idled near the fence. Inside were two local farmers from beyond Cedar Ridge. "You really building a tunnel?" one asked, eyes wide. "Sure am," I said. They grinned. "Good. About damn time someone stood up to her." Turns out, I wasn't the only one Linda had tried to strong-arm. One neighbor had been fined for leaving hay bales visible from the subdivision road. Another was written up for excessive tractor noise. None of them had ever joined the HOA, but Linda had been extending her reach every year. My fight wasn't just mine anymore. It had become a rallying point. Within days, volunteers started showing up. Retired vets, local handymen, even a high school kid who wanted welding practice. We worked in shifts, digging, bracing, hauling dirt in barrels camouflaged under tarps. Every shovel of soil became an act of defiance. Linda, of course, doubled down. She installed security cameras around the gate, convinced I'd try to ram it with my truck. She even hired a private security guard, an overpaid mall cop who spent more time scrolling Instagram than guarding anything. And at every HOA meeting, she spun wild tales about me, how I was reckless, dangerous, a threat to their peaceful neighborhood. But she was losing her grip. In small towns, word spreads faster than wildfire. Even some Cedar Ridge residents had started whispering, blocking a man from his own land. That's not HOA business. That's tyranny. I knew I had to document everything. So I set up motion-activated cameras across my property line. They captured Linda pacing like a hawk, the trench deepening, workers reinforcing the barricade. I archived every certified letter, every bogus violation, every veiled threat. If this went to court and it was heading that way, I'd have a case no judge could ignore. Then came the night everything almost fell apart. Summer storm rolled in, lightning cracking, rain pouring in sheets. Around midnight, I spotted flashing lights through the trees. An ambulance parked helplessly at the trench. One of my neighbors, an older man with heart trouble, had collapsed. The paramedics couldn't reach him. Linda's blockade had trapped them. I sprinted through the mud and flagged them down. I shouted that I knew another way. We loaded their gear onto my dirt bike trailer and hauled them across the forest trail I carved weeks ago. It was rough, slow, brutal Dot by the time we reached the man. Precious minutes had been lost. He survived. But just barely, that incident lit a fire in me. This wasn't just about pride anymore. Linda's little power games had nearly cost a man his life. The next morning, I called the sheriff and filed another complaint, this time with the ambulance report attached. He sounded tired, but his tone shifted. If this hits court, he said, that trench is gonna look real bad for the HOA. I smiled grimly. Good, because I'm done playing nice. The tunnel was ready. All that remained was the reveal. I rigged cameras from multiple angles, ensuring every second of Linda's disbelief would be captured. I even mounted a motion-activated spotlight aimed directly at her precious gate. That night, with rain misting over the valley, I tested the tunnel. The walls held. The braces ground, but stayed firm. My truck crawled forward, headlights slicing through the dark, and then, just like that, I emerged on the far side of Cedar Ridge, past the gate, past the trench. Past every wall Linda tried to build. For the first time in weeks, I felt free, but the real show, that was set for sunrise. It felt like a mission. Briefing, I'd spent the night rehearsing every step in my mind. Start the trek. Drive through the tunnel. Capture Linda's reaction. Broadcast it to the entire county. This wasn't just about proving her wrong anymore. It was about unmasking the petty tyrant hiding behind rules, fines, and fences. As the sun crept over Redstone County, I positioned my truck at the tunnel's mouth. My hands gripped the wheel, adrenaline buzzing through me like static. For a second, I thought about everything that had led here. The buckets of soil, the bruises, the sweat. It all came down to this. I shifted into drive. The walls trembled slightly, but the supports held. Headlights carved through the narrow space, tires crunching on gravel. 100 feet later, daylight cracked through. I pressed the gas, and suddenly I was free. I rolled out onto the county road, past the trench, past the gate like a ghost phasing through walls. For the first time in weeks, I didn't need to beg favors or dodge barricades. The sense of victory was electric. But the real payoff came minutes later, right on cue. Linda arrived, clipboard in hand, dressed like she was heading to a photo shoot instead of a battlefield. She tapped on her phone, no doubt logging another incident report. Then she froze. Her eyes locked on me as I leaned casually against my truck, arms folded, her jaw slackened. She glanced at the trench, at the gate, back at me. How? She sputtered. I grinned. Morning, Linda. Panic rippled across her face. She spun around, searching for cameras, tricks, anything to explain what she'd just seen. And then she spotted it. The faint mound in the dirt near the trench, the hidden tunnel mouth. Her face drained. No, she whispered, rushing toward it. No, no, no. The cameras I'd set up captured everything, her frantic pacing, her clawing at the dirt, her meltdown exploding into a screech that echoed across the valley. By noon, the footage was online. I uploaded it everywhere, local forums, neighborhood groups, every Facebook page where HOA gossip thrived. HOA. Karen, outsmarted by a tunnel, spread like wildfire. Neighbors messaged me laughing at her tantrum. Strangers sent screenshots of her ranting in community chats, demanding the footage be taken down. But once the internet had it, it was permanent. And Linda, she didn't just lose face, she lost her grip on the HOA. Board members started questioning her judgment. The treasurer resigned. Even her loyalists began to distance themselves, unwilling to be dragged down by her obsession. But Linda wasn't ready to surrender. 2 days later, a sheriff's deputy knocked on my door, handing me a thick envelope. Inside, a lawsuit. Cedar Ridge, represented by Linda, was accusing me of destruction of community infrastructure and illegal tunneling beneath private property. I laughed out loud. Illegal tunneling? She made it sound like I'd built a subway system, but I knew better than to underestimate paperwork. This was her new strategy: bleed me dry in court. Fortunately, I wasn't alone. The video had earned me more than laughs. It had earned me allies, people who had suffered under HOA. Tyranny began reaching out. A couple fined $200 for leaving. Christmas lights up until January 2nd. Man threatened with foreclosure over unapproved garden gnomes. Stories poured in patterns of abuse that mirrored mine. And when they saw someone finally push back, they wanted in donations-filled a legal defense fund. Local lawyers volunteered hours. Even a retired judge wrote me a letter reminding me, if your property is landlocked, the law recognizes your right of ingress and egress. No, it can erase that. Armed with this, I prepared for battle. My attorney filed a countersuit charging the HOA with harassment, obstruction of property access, and reckless endangerment for blocking emergency services. Exhibit A, the ambulance report. Exhibit B, Linda's certified letters. Exhibit C, the footage of her trench blockade. By the time we stacked the evidence, our case weighed more than the trench dirt itself. The court date was set for early fall. Until then, the tension simmered. I kept using the tunnel daily, waving at Linda whenever she lingered near the gate. Sometimes I honked just to watch her flinch. Each time I passed, her face turned redder like a kettle about to whistle. One evening, I drove through blasting Johnny Cash's I Walk the Line, and for the first time, Linda looked like she knew. Her line was breaking. Linda shouted something I couldn't hear over the music, but her fists shook in the air like a cartoon villain. My neighbors applauded as I rolled out, treating it like a parade. Children clapped, and one kid even held up a homemade sign and marker. Go Miles, beat the HOA. It wasn't just my fight anymore. It had become a spectacle, a lesson, and a warning. The more Linda pushed, the more the community pulled away. She wanted to isolate me. Instead, she isolated herself. By the time the first court papers were filed, Cedar Ridge wasn't just a subdivision anymore. It was a circus. My video had spread beyond Redstone County. In the diner, in the feed store, strangers grinned and slapped my back. You're the tunnel guy, ain't you? But with all the laughter came serious stakes. Linda had dragged the war into court, believing paperwork and connections would finally crush me. The HOA's lawsuit read like a fever dream. Destruction of infrastructure, unauthorized excavation, safety hazards. In her fantasy, I wasn't a farmer. I was some kind of mad miner undermining civilization itself. What Linda didn't count on was preparation. Every fake violation, every certified letter, every video of the trench I had archived meticulously. My attorney, Rebecca Sloan, turned it into binders thicker than cinder blocks. And then came the bombshell. One of Linda's own board members, sick of her tyranny, leaked internal emails. In them, Linda bragged about her plan to leverage access as a tool of compliance. Plain English? Extortion. Rebecca grinned when she read them. She just handed us Exhibit D. This isn't defense anymore, it's offense. Meanwhile, Linda spiraled deeper. She added floodlights, motion sensors, even hired another security guard, a 20-year-old with aviator shades and a fake badge bought online. The day he tried to ID a real county deputy was the day I knew Linda had officially lost touch with reality. The turning point came on a stormy Thursday. My cameras caught her at the gate with a bullhorn, shrieking at delivery drivers, "Trespassers will be prosecuted." Most turned back, but one UPS guy had no patience. He parked, sloshed through the mud with packages in hand. Linda screamed she'd call federal authorities. He shot back, "Lady, I am federal." That clip went viral overnight. Linda sputtering, tape ripping across cardboard boxes. It became Exhibit EPROOF of her unreasonable, unhinged behavior. But it wasn't just embarrassment anymore. One night, a neighbor called, panicked. His wife had gone into labor, and the ambulance was once again stuck at the trench dot. I guided the EMTs through my tunnel, straight to his property. Hours later, a healthy baby girl was born in the hospital. The parents sent me a card. You saved her first breath. That card became Exhibit F, and nothing sways a judge like proof someone's obsession endangered livestock by then. Even Cedar Ridge residents were defecting. Fewer showed up to Linda's safety patrols. One elderly couple approached me quietly. In the hardware store. We're sorry, the wife whispered. We voted for her once. We didn't know she'd turn like this, but Linda. She refused to admit defeat. At the next HOA meeting in their polished clubhouse, she launched into a tirade ranting about outsiders, infiltration, and conspiracies. Her words didn't sound like leadership anymore. They sounded like desperation. My cameras weren't the only ones catching her spiral. A neighbor slipped me footage from an HOA meeting residents, staring blankly as Linda ranted about me building a militia underground. Man raised his hand and said, deadpan, or maybe it's just a tunnel. The laughter nearly drowned her out. By late summer, the courtroom showdown loomed. Rebecca drilled me on testimony. Stay calm, stay factual. Let her lose control. Judges don't like theatrics, and Linda can't help herself. She was right. The evidence we carried wasn't just heavy, it was damning. The morning of the hearing, reporters clustered on the courthouse steps. Mr. Carter, how did you dig the tunnel? One shouted. Another called, do you regret defying the HOA? I smiled carefully. Not for a second. Inside, tension crackled. Linda sat at the plaintiff's table, pearl necklace gleaming, lips so tight they nearly disappeared. Her lawyer leaned in frantically, but she just kept glaring at me, like her stare alone could set me on fire. I folded my hands, calm as stone. Rebecca stacked our exhibits with surgeon-like precision. The judge entered, adjusted his glasses, and read the docket. Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association versus Miles Carter. Let's proceed. This was it, the war of gates, trenches, and tunnels now measured in law instead of steel. Linda's lawyer went first. Slick words, shaky suit. He spun tales of community integrity and dangerous unauthorized activity. He painted me as a rogue tunneler undermining their sacred road. At one point, he muttered, eco-terrorists. The gallery erupted in muffled laughter. The judge's eyebrow arched. Then Rebecca stood. Her voice was calm, precise, surgical. She laid it bare. My property was landlocked. That road had been openly used for decades. The HOA's blockade wasn't about safety. It was unlawful. Harassment. She explained easement law in plain English. If a property has no other access, the owner has a legal right of ingress and egress, regardless of who technically owns the road. Then she dropped the bomb. Internal emails projected on a screen. Linda's own words, bragging about cutting him off until he complies. The courtroom gasped. Linda squirmed in her chair, hissing at her lawyer. The judge's frown deepened. Testimony began. Rebecca called me first. She guided me through my background, 2 decades as a military engineer, my purchase of the land, my reliance on that road. I described Linda's ultimatums. The steel gate, the trench that blocked not just me, but ambulances. I told the story of the neighbor's heart attack. The ambulance stranded in the rain. The gallery fell silent. Even the judge's pen paused mid-note. As I described guiding paramedics through the woods. The judge's pen paused mid-note. That detail landed like a hammer. Then it was Linda's turn. She strutted to the stand with forced confidence. But the cracks showed fast. Rebecca asked, did you personally approve the trench? Yes. Did you consider the impact on emergency vehicles? Irrelevant. When confronted with her own emails, she stammered, taken out of context. By her third contradiction, the judge's patience was thinning. The highlight came when Rebecca asked, "Are you aware of the National Fire Protection Association standards requiring unobstructed access for emergency vehicles?" Linda smirked. "Those don't apply to us. We're a private community." The courtroom erupted in whispers. The judge's gavel slammed too late. The damage was done. Witnesses followed. The UPS driver with the viral clip retold the moment Linda shrieked at him, still grinning on the stand, then the neighbor, whose wife gave birth after EMTs, used my tunnel. He held up a photo of his newborn daughter. "If not for that tunnel," he said, "my girl might not be here." Silence fell heavy. Linda's lawyer tried to pivot, claiming the tunnel itself was unsafe. Rebecca countered with blueprints, soil analysis, and photos built to higher standards than most county culverts, she said flatly. The judge nodded by closing arguments. The outcome felt inevitable. Linda's lawyer rambled about community precedent. Rebecca cut through like a blade. "This case isn't about bylaws. It's about abuse of power." The HOA weaponized an easement, endangered lives, fabricated violations, and extorted a landowner. "The law does not support tyranny, Your Honor. It never has, and it never will." The courtroom held its breath. The judge leaned back, hands steepled. His gaze swept from Linda Ashen, trembling, to me. Sitting steady, "I've heard enough," he said. The actions of the Cedar Ridge HOA were reckless, malicious, and in direct violation of Mr. Carter's rights. This court grants permanent, unrestricted access to his property via the Cedar Ridge Road. The gate and trench are to be removed immediately at the HOA's expense. Gasps filled the room. He wasn't finished. Furthermore, due to harassment and endangerment, Cedar Ridge HOA will pay damages of $25,000, including attorney's fees. "And Miss Harrow?" His eyes locked on her. "You are fined $25,000 personally for abuse of authority. Effective immediately, you are removed as HOA president." Linda's face drained of color. Her lawyer slumped. Defeated. The gallery neighbors, farmers, even strangers burst into hushed cheers. I exhaled for the first time in months. Outside, reporters swarmed me. "How does it feel to win?" One asked. I glanced back at the doors, where Linda still sat frozen. "It feels like justice," I said simply. But I knew this wasn't just an ending. It was the start of her downfall. Days later, county crews arrived. Sparks flew as welders cut apart her steel gate. Bulldozers filled the trench flat. The road, once her weapon, was just a gravel lane again. I stood with neighbors watching her empire crumble. One farmer chuckled. "Funny how fast a queen loses her castle." Linda never appeared. Rumors said she hid inside, blinds drawn. Her allies abandoned her. Cedar Ridge held an emergency election. This time, the community voted for someone quiet, Ellen Drake, a school teacher with no taste for drama. Her first act? A public apology and a promise of transparency. But Linda's humiliation didn't stop there. Local papers ran headlines. HOA president ousted after tunnel showdown. The viral video of her meltdown at the gate replayed again and again, her legacy sealed. Not with power, but with ridicule. Memes spread like wildfire. Linda's face was photoshopped as a medieval guard, screaming, "No entry," from atop a cartoon moat. At the feed store, I spotted a t-shirt, a tunnel sketch with the words, "Miles ahead of the HOA." Everywhere she went. Whispers followed Dot at the grocery store. A clerk snickered. At the post office, someone muttered, "That's the tunnel lady, outside the bank." I once saw her slam her car door shut and burst into tears when a passerby shouted, "Hey, Karen dug any ditches lately?" Meanwhile, life for the rest of us finally bloomed. Lawns grew naturally instead of being shaved to military precision. Kids left bikes in driveways without fines. Porch lights flickered late with laughter instead of fear. Under Ellen's leadership, neighbors began sharing stories, shocking ones, fines for laundry, threats over paint colors, even warnings about barking dogs. Linda had turned a neighborhood into a gulag. Now it was free. I knew we had to celebrate. So I planned the Liberation Cookout. Flyers went up everywhere, blunt and simple, celebrating freedom from HOA Tyranny. All welcome except Linda. That line alone set the county buzzing. The day came and my pasture transformed. Grills smoked. Kids raced four-wheelers. A band played from a flatbed truck. Neighbors brought pies. Veterans brought flags. Even the sheriff dropped by to shake my hand. At the tunnel's entrance, I unveiled a steel sign welded by a local craftsman, Harrow passage and memory of petty tyrants everywhere. The crowd roared with laughter. One teen filmed himself walking through the tunnel, narrating, "This is where Curran lost the war." Within hours, it went viral. Of course, Linda heard. She drove past slowly, her car crawling along the very road she once tried to own. She saw the banner, "No more gates, no more queens." She saw neighbors, her former followers, laughing around my bonfire. And she saw me at the tunnel entrance, beer raised in a mock salute as her car sped away. The humiliation was total. Within a month, her house was up for sale. Rumors said she left town entirely, fleeing to a distant suburb where no one knew her name or her tunnel. Life settled back into what I'd always wanted. Trucks rumbled freely down the road. The UPS driver honked each time, giving me a thumbs up. The neighbor's baby girl toddled onto my porch, her mother thanking me again. The fire marshal sent a note, glad to see sanity restored. Roads are for safety, not power games. But I kept the tunnel. Not because I needed it anymore, the road was open, but because it had become a symbol. People came from other counties just to see it, snapping photos like it was a monument. I joked about charging for tours and funneling the money into a community fund. To my surprise, people actually lined up. The battle had scarred me, yes, but it had also bonded a community, reminding us how fragile freedom can be under petty authority. And for me, it cemented one truth. When someone wolves you in, sometimes the best answer is to dig your own way out. As the sun set on the cookout, the band played their last song. Kids chased fireflies. Smoke curled from grills. The tunnel glowed under a spotlight, the sign Harrow passage shining like a beacon. Linda had wanted obedience. Instead, she created unity, and standing there, beer in hand, neighbors laughing, freedom in the air, I realized this wasn't just my victory. It belonged to everyone who's ever stood up to a bully and said, "Not today." Yep, right under their noses. Built it with my own two hands and a few stubborn friends. But deeper than the humor was something far more lasting: trust. Without Linda's shadow looming over every lawn and mailbox, neighbors started treating each other differently. Instead of tattling, people helped. A farmer left hay bales by the roadside with a sign, "Take what you need." Kids biked freely again. Even the Cedar Ridge lawns, once trimmed to military precision, grew a little wild. And no one cared. It felt like freedom itself had seeped into the soil. As for Linda, her name lived on only as a punchline. The Harrow Passage sign at the tunnel's entrance became a landmark. Folks spray-painted funny additions: Kern Crossing, Dictator Detour, even the Gate to Nowhere. I left most of them up. Every laugh was another nail in the coffin of her empire. But beneath the celebration lay the real lesson. Tyranny doesn't start big. It starts small with clipboards, vines, and rules that seem harmless. Until one day, those rules block ambulances. Power only becomes dangerous when people stay silent. One crisp October evening, I sat on my porch with a cold beer, watching the sunset bleed across the horizon. A UPS truck rolled down the road. No detours, no gates. The driver grinned, leaned out the window and shouted, "Still love that tunnel, Miles." I tipped my bottle in salute. The sound of gravel under his tires was sweeter than any victory speech. I'd bought this land for peace, and I'm fighting for it. I found something bigger, a community that finally understood what peace really means. Not rules and bylaws, but the freedom to live without fear of petty power. If Linda ever watches from afar, I hope she realizes it too. No gate, no trench, no clipboard can hold back the truth. People will always find a way forward, even if they have to dig a tunnel to do it. That tunnel wasn't just steel and soil. It was defiance carved into the earth. Proof there's always another way. In life, we all face our own gates and trenches. Sometimes they're built by bosses, neighbors, or even family who try to control us. The lesson is clear. Don't let anyone wall you in. Know your rights. Stand your ground. And when someone says you can't show them, you can. If this story resonated with you, drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from and share your own battles against unfair rules or power-hungry people. And if you haven't already hit subscribe, more stories are coming, and trust me, you won't want to miss the next twist.